Chalo Dilli, onwards to Delhi. That was their battle cry. More than that, it was an expression of pain for a long sought after dream. A dream of freedom for India. Give me blood, and I'll give you freedom, he had said. And from Singapore, on that overcast July day in 1943, the Azad Hind Fauj would begin its march to Delhi. They would reach Imphal, and for the first time the Indian flag would flutter proudly in the Indian sky. Yet the moment of triumph would be fleeting. In the jungles of Burma, the forgotten army would make one last stand, and their dream was to shatter in the pain of defeat. More than half a century later, some of them returned. The Azad Hind expedition would retrace that historic march. This is the story of those who returned. Today, the bustling city-state of Singapore is an economic powerhouse, one of the Asian tigers whose roar dominates the world economy. 50 years ago, however, another roar was to go forth from Singapore, a roar that shook the very foundations of the British Empire in India. The story of the Azad Hind Fauj, or the Indian National Army, truly begins with what Winston Churchill called the worst disaster and the biggest capitulation in British history, the fall of Singapore. By February 1942, the Japanese Imperial Army's lightning advance down the Malayan Peninsula had brought it to the gates of the seemingly impregnable British fortress of Singapore. The last natural barrier was the Johor Straits, and the Japanese quickly crossed it, untouched by the island's large guns, which expected the invasion from the sea. The guns were all facing eastward, and the Japanese, on the 8th of February 1942, came in from the northwest. Across the front line, resistance amongst the 135,000 British, Australian, and Indian soldiers collapsed, as they faced only 30,000 Japanese soldiers. On the 15th of February, Singapore was within range of Japanese artillery. General Percival, the British commander, invited the Japanese to discuss terms of peace. Yamashita, the Japanese commander, was stunned. With only a few days' supplies and ammunition, he had in fact been thinking of calling off the final assault. But General Percival, unaware of the Japanese position, saw no way out and surrendered unconditionally. 90,000 men were taken prisoner by the Japanese. Half of them were Indians. The next day, to their great surprise, the Indian prisoners were separated from their British comrades. On the 17th of February, the Indians received orders to march to a nearby football field called Farrer Park. Under an overcast sky that day, 1942, among those who gathered was a young officer of the British Indian Army, Captain Gurbakh Singh Dhillon.
बहुत चेंज हो गया, इतना वो skyscrapers तो उस वक्त थे ही नहीं.
50 years later, he returns with Lieutenant Yadav to the place where they first heard about the Azad Hind Fauj.
When I see this place, I'm reminded of 17th February 1942. General Percival had surrendered on the 15th evening, and we were spread out all over the island from different places. We were ordered to collect here what was called Old Race Course or Ferrer Park. So we came, and all this place was full of Indian soldiers. We were all without water, without food. We had assembled here. Just you imagine that we had lost the battle, and we didn't know what is in store for us. And then General Fujiwara, at that time a major, he came and he said, "You Indians have been surrendered to us as prisoners, and we are Asians, so are you. Your country, the land of Buddha, the land of Gandhi, they are fighting for their liberation. You soldiers should also come forward to fight. How can a brother keep a brother as a prisoner? For us, you are free people." And then he said that I hand you over to Captain Mohan Singh, the general officer commanding of the Indian National Army. That was the first time we heard that name.
Earlier, Mohan Singh had become a Japanese prisoner of war in Malaya. He had taken upon himself the responsibility for forming an Indian National Army composed of Indian prisoners of war.
Captain Mohan Singh, he said that who will volunteer for the freedom of India? So everybody, most of the people, they put their hands up instead of one, both hands up. And there were naras, slogans of Inqilab Zindabad, Azad Hind Zindabad, and that type of, you see, some people threw their pagdis up into the air or caps up, and some people even stood up and jumped up. There was absolutely a change of mood from defeated people into something that we are going to achieve something. So I remained there throughout the night along with my men, struggling in the mind. And by the morning of 18th, I had decided that I will join the IN. So for me, this was the decisive place, the decisive point, somewhere over that dark place. In between was I.
Within a fortnight of the Farrer Park meeting, more than 40,000 men had joined the INA. But there were a number of problems in the practical task of organizing the Liberation Army. Many felt that the way the Japanese treated the new army and Indian prisoners of war as a whole was unsatisfactory, and a dispute led to the arrest of General Mohan Singh. Soldiers and civilians alike, what the Indians needed was a leader, someone who could seize the movement with both hands and propel it forward. A great many Indians in East Asia knew that there was only one man outside India who could start a real Indian National Army. And that man was in Germany. Subhash Chandra Bose had escaped from house arrest in India and reached Berlin in April of 1941. Although Bose had no sympathy for the Nazis, he had come to Germany in order to gain access to the soldiers in the British Indian Army captured as prisoners of war. Bose clearly identified the British Indian Army as the ultimate instrument of colonial control and was determined to subvert the loyalty of these Indian soldiers to the King Emperor and replace it with a new loyalty to the Indian nation. Bose dreamt of raising a legion of 50,000 and advancing overland along with German forces to drive the British from India. But only 4,000 soldiers joined, and the legion fell far short of an army fit to invade India. Hitler had no sympathy for Indian nationalism, and when they came face to face, the Führer avoided the issue of India's independence and Bose's demand to remove from Mein Kampf racist references offensive to Indians. Also, with the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Bose realized his hopes of invading India from overland were hopeless. Totally disillusioned with Germany, Subhash Chandra Bose and a young companion, Abid Hassan, began an epic journey on the 8th of February 1943, the first stage of which was in a German submarine. In enemy-infested waters near Madagascar, Bose was transferred to a Japanese submarine. After 90 days under the oceans, he arrived in Sumatra. From there, he flew to Tokyo, where he spent a couple of months. And on the 2nd of July, 1943, Subhash Chandra Bose arrived in Singapore.
सुभाष जान हिंद है सुभाष मान हिंद है सुभाष आन हिंद है सुभाष शान हिंद है सुभाष जी वो जान हिंद आ गए है नाज जिस पे हिंद को वो शान हिंद आ गए.
Thousands had gathered at the Kallang airstrip to greet him on his arrival. Among them was a young doctor, Lakshmi Swaminathan.
I still remember very clearly the day that Netaji arrived in Singapore. I was one among the thousands of Indians, men and women, awaiting his arrival. Seeing him, I knew that all the months we had passed of the INA crisis, of frustration and despair were now over, that at last we had found a leader who had come to lead us on to Delhi, on to victory. And the very next day, there was a meeting at the Cathay Hall which every single Indian man, woman and child attended, and I was also one amongst those.
50 years later, the scene of that meeting in the Cathay Cinema is still fresh in the memory of these veterans. A popular cinema theatre today, it was at that time the tallest building in Singapore. Seated in the first row at that meeting, Colonel Dillon caught his first glimpse of Netaji. It was to make an impression that would never leave him.
I have come here after half a century, and looking at Cathay, I feel blessed. This is the place where I saw the great leader, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, for the first time. It was 4th of July, 1943. So blessed is this place, and blessed are we, because this is the spot where Netaji gave us first appearance, first audience, this Cathay Hall was packed like sardines by representatives of all the Indians from so many countries. I was sitting in the front row near the dais and could see Netaji clearly. Raspberry Bose, the president of Indian Independence League, got up and said, "I have brought for you the best specimen of an Indian, Subhash Chandra Bose." Then Netaji spoke. I shall never forget his words. "We will encounter hunger, thirst, and death on the way. It cannot be said how many of us will return alive. The point is that in the end, we shall achieve our goal. India shall be free."
Even on that very first day, we could all feel that now we had found a leader whom we could follow till the end, a leader who would never let us down, a leader who was very courageous and would not expect any one of us to do anything that he himself was not prepared to do.
In the months that followed, Netaji addressed a series of public meetings that were to transform the lives of thousands of Indians in Singapore, and in fact all over Southeast Asia. On the 6th of July, on this Maidan, in front of the Singapore City Hall, 16,000 Indian soldiers of the INA marched past Netaji as he took the salute from an improvised wooden platform hastily erected across the steps of the City Hall. It was here, at the Padang, that Netaji gave the movement its war cry, "Chalo Delhi, onwards to Delhi." Here that he called upon the thousands gathered before him to sacrifice their all for the sake of freedom.
I am confident that with the help of my countrymen in East Asia, I shall be able to organize such a gigantic force as will be able to sweep away the British power from India in conjunction with those who have already been fighting at home. The hour has struck, and every patriotic Indian must advance towards the field of battle. Only when the blood of freedom-loving Indians begins to flow will India attain her freedom. Inqilab Zindabad. Azad Hind Zindabad.
More such mass meetings were to follow. At a second rally at the Padang on the 9th of July, Netaji addressed civilians of Indian origin. Here he called for a mobilization of all Indians in East Asia. The Azad Hind Fauj, composed only of ex-British Indian Army prisoners of war, would not do. He must have a truly national army. Netaji foresaw the creation of a regiment composed entirely of fearless, death-defying women. It would be called, in homage to the warrior queen who had fought the British in 1857, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. The magic of Netaji's words resounded in the ears of the young Lakshmi Swaminathan, transforming her. She knew her life would never be the same again.
All night, I kept awake thinking of the bombshell that Netaji had dropped when he said that he was going to start a women's regiment called the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. So early next morning, I went to see him and told him that I was ready to join the regiment. So he told me, "I want you to first understand that is not just a propaganda stunt, but I want you to be trained as a proper infantry soldier and then to go to the front and take up arms and fight against the British." So I said, "When shall I start?" He said, "You can start from tomorrow." So then I went round and collected 20 young women who had also heard Netaji's speech, and we practiced for 3 days and then presented arms to Netaji at a women's meeting. We were dressed in simple white saris because we didn't have any uniforms, but still we were able to present arms very smartly, and this pleased Netaji endlessly.
The barracks on Waterloo Street that housed the Rani of Jhansi regiment have now been destroyed. But as Lakshmi Swaminathan returns today to Waterloo Street, in her mind's eye, she can see herself and her colleagues going through the rigors of drill and exercises, almost as if the intervening 50 years had never happened.
Mr. Jacob, you remember the Rani of Jhansi regiment camp was here, and we had our main barracks here, and because it extended right up to that road. And so that was our training grounds. Especially seeing this place, I can see all my Ranis, as we were called, you know, lined up here. We used to start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there we used to have our PT flag hoisting ceremony. Unforgettable time. People say, what about all the hardships? But you know, when you have a goal, when you have a sincere and wonderful leader, then all these things don't matter at all, you know.
October came, and on the 21st of the month, Bose announced the formation of the Arzi Hukumat-e-Azad Hind, the provisional government of India, and Lakshmi took her place as a minister for the official photograph. At a solemn ceremony at the Cathay Cinema, Netaji took the oath of allegiance. In the name of God, I take this sacred oath to liberate India and 400 million of my countrymen. Tears welled in his eyes, and his throat choked with emotion as he continued, I, Subhash Chandra Bose, will continue the sacred war of freedom till the last breath of my life. 3 days later, 50,000 Indians assembled at the Padang. An afternoon sun shone gently on them, as Bose proclaimed, the provisional government of Azad Hind declared war on Britain and America at 5 minutes past midnight. The British know very well that I say what I mean, and that I mean what I say. So when I say war, I mean war. War to the finish. War that can only end in the freedom of India. Their war of independence had begun.
दुश्मनों